lovely room to be in this Friday morning. So I'll start by sharing a bit about my professional experiences, and then I'll get into those layers, the main topic of the talk. Oh, I was meant to be saying that. There's that slide. On we go. So I started off as editor of the Skinny magazine, which was a cultural listings magazine running in Scotland. And notable in this context, we were really close to the creative community. We often hosted illustrators on the front cover, and yeah, sort of integrated very thoroughly into that mindset. That said, a coup we had while I was there, we had the UK first magazine cover for Arcade Fire. We're going back quite a while now, but there was a span of a few months where they were about the most hyped band in the world, and for us to get in there with that was a real moment for this little independent magazine we were. Having worked in arts media, I made the step fully across into arts management and curatorship, and still in Edinburgh, I was the first artistic director of this venue, Summer Hall, which transformed the former vet school of the university into a festival and multifaceted arts venue. And we opened in 2011, and our remit, what we always wanted to do was do things differently that pushed the boundaries of presentation. And in our first year, we were blessed with this amazing production and adaptation of the Medea story. It opened at midnight with a kind of ravey opening act. Then people were put to bed and read stories. And then at 7:30 a.m. the performance finished with a communal Brazilian-style breakfast. And that really set down a marker for the kind of work we wanted to do there. We featured theatre, dance, visual art, and yeah, it was a treat to be involved with that. From there, I moved on to London, where I was head of performance and dance at the South Bank Centre. So some of you may know it. If you know London, it's a space a bit like the Esplanade, but in London, on the banks of the River Thames. We had a lot of fun. We presented the first touring iteration of Jean-Paul Gaultier's Fashion Freak Show, which was a nice big production. While there, a fond memory was putting the first ever performance on the roof of the Royal Festival Hall, you can see there, which was a beautiful location with the river and landmarks of London, and then this dance and music performance up there for a small audience. After South Bank Centre, I moved to Singapore. My wife and child are Singaporean, so Singapore is increasingly home, and was director of programs for Arts House Limited. COVID was no small factor during my tenure there, but we were able to produce some really nice digital programs in response to the fact that people just couldn't meet up. Bell was an audio tour, which subsequently went to Korea as well to be showcased there. And Red Sky at Dawn was a graphic novel, but as far as we know, the first interactive graphic novel that was sort of navigable by readers online. And that actually won the Best Narrative Award at the Age of Games Awards in 2022. And that's by Singaporean writer Troy Chip. That's my work looks. Okay, so let me get into the topic of the day, layers. And I'm thrilled to be talking about layers, because honestly I do think in terms of layers a lot. So it's a very warm topic for me. So when I look back on my career, as I've just done, it sort of makes you think of layers to begin with. You know, layers are, in that very simple sense, just one thing on top of another. And that sense of accumulated experience through our working lives, the way one thing leads to another but informs the other, supporting it on the way up. It's just one of the ways in which the idea of layering comes very naturally to us, at least to me, as we think about how otherwise quite intangible things like the passing of time actually work. So I'm going to be speaking to you about layers, not least because layers inform a lot of my thinking about how things operate. I'll speak a bit about both my areas of practice, both as an artist and in the context of commercial brand writing. But I'll also be taking a deeper dive into the subject of layers, looking at some specific examples from history and cultural history, and from that, looking at what those examples can tell us about layers. How they can inform our thinking as creative practitioners, and also just experiences of the world around us. To accompany the first part of this talk, I'll be sharing some photographs by the Singaporean photographer Daniel Porthan. Now, his images speak for themselves, but I'm happy to take questions about his work at the end as well. One thing Daniel said to me recently when I met him really spoke to me about the subject of layers. Because he spoke about how when he finds a place he wants to take photos, he'll go up and down that street, that location 10 or 15 times. And that first pass, the photos he's taking look like something from a tourist brochure. You know, they're what you're meant to see, they're the things that draw your attention. But with each revisit, he gets closer to the real perception he wants to draw out from the place. And there's a kind of unlayering there of the habitual perceptions we have to get to something more authentic and real that, I thought was really impressive, not least. The dedication of going back 10 to 15 times is really something, and that's particularly the case because Daniel's a wheelchair user. So he's got this particular perspective already, but he doubles down on that, really sort of finding the truth of locations that I thought really spoke to the theme today. I keep wanting to press for the next slide on the laptop. Please excuse me, I'll just try and break that habit. But so another way we might think about layers is that sense of accumulated baggage of day-to-day perception that can get in the way of our best and realist creativity. And how can we strip back through those to get to something that feels true to that moment or that expression? So this talk then is also about layers of perception. So layers of perception in the sense of how we reckon with that wild mystery of lived experience, and layers of perception in a business and commercial sense. They're pretty different areas, but as I hope we'll see today, there are connecting themes. One of these connecting themes that I see in both those areas is language. The way in which words work to navigate between the different layers of perception. And not only that, what I'll be looking to show to you today is that layers help us in a way that few other tools, the words help us navigate those layers in ways that few other tools do. So this talk is looking at the theme of layers as an intuitive, graspable theme for the world, but also how language helps us navigate between them. And not just thinking about language in terms of one thing on top of another, but those layers between them as well. And we'll be talking about liminal spaces in the context of layers. So let's start by thinking about another kind of unlayering. Okay. Imagine you're here. This is Mosul. This beautiful photograph shows Mosul as it was before the destruction of recent conflicts. But the time you're there, I'd like you to imagine you're there in 1844. It probably didn't look so very different to how it looks here. And you've heard that under mounds in Mosul, there are antiquities to be discovered. So you stop your journey to dig here. And what you discover are the ancient palaces of the city of Nineveh. Room after room of sculptures and reliefs, battle scenes, huge winged bulls under these mounds. And not only that, you find tens of thousands of clay tablets covered in writing. They look like this. So you're literally digging through the layers of history, and underground you find writing. I find that such an incredible image to wrap my head around. Now, being British, and this being the Victorian era, what you do is you send a lot of this stuff back to the British Museum. Sorry. But what then happens over the course of decades is that these tens of thousands of clay tablets are translated and then over decades are rearranged like a giant jigsaw puzzle until what we end up with is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is the earliest literature we know. The oldest, fully formed story where humans are talking to each other in an imaginative way about what life is like. Let's have a look at how it opens, the very start of the oldest piece of literature we know. He had seen everything, experienced all emotions. Do we know which way I should be pointing the clicker, by the way? It seems to be giving me a few pauses for thought. But I'll keep going. From exaltation to despair, he had been granted a vision into the great mystery, the secret places, the primeval days before the flood. He had journeyed to the edge of the world and made his way back, exhausted but whole. He had carved his trials on stone tablets, had restored the holy Iana temple and the massive wall of Uruk, which no city on earth can equal. Okay, so it's an amazingly evocative opening sequence. And this bit particularly jumps out at me. The idea that this powerful king, I wouldn't call him a hero, he's a pretty complicated figure, but he's the central figure of this story, and he's remarkable for having had a vision into the great mystery, the secret places. So he's got that sense of an adventurous spirit, but also an ability to get into those layers between those interstitial environments. These days we might think of those being places you reach through a sort of glitch in the fabric of reality or digital technology, but here it is all about that quest narrative to go and find something beyond the realms of the familiar. And so, by this example, what it seems to me is that not only when you think about layers, do you think about layers of history. You think about accumulation of meaning and human achievement and context going way back. But when you go all that way back, you find the power of words right there. And the power of words shows us all sorts of things. It shows the value system of that ancient civilization. We can, in a sense, inhabit the imagination of this ancient Middle Eastern civilization through the power of words. And we can understand how they communicated it to each other through words. And I marvel at that. Now, there's something I'd like to come back to about this idea of liminal spaces. Okay? People have been drawn, since the earliest literature we know, to this idea of the visionary environment. Literally, Gilgamesh had vision, went into visionary spaces. We see it come up in so many of the stories we find most powerful. This is a scene from the Red Lodge from David Lynch's Twin Peaks. I'm sure many of you recognise it. It's a kind of almost purgatorial liminal space inhabited by strange characters. But there's this sense of a deeper truth that lies beneath our day-to-day that resides there. Here it is in a music video. This is The Weeknd seeing stars, but at the same time, it's almost like those stars are inside him too. You know, there's that sense that visions tell us something that we don't perceive every day that's kind of a deeper truth as well. And here's a beautiful scene from a Hayao Miyazaki film, which shows us a vision of nature that's simultaneously kind of beautiful but inaccessible and mysterious, and gives that sense that this visionary liminal space is all around us all the time. Yeah, sure, that's not a regular deer, but it's a regular forest, really. You know, there's this sense that all around us there's that layer informing reality that isn't something we're in touch with day to day. Okay, so next I'd like to sort of explore this theme a little bit more by referencing a book I've just been reading recently, The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. I don't know if any of you know it, but Huxley is most famous for writing A Brave New World, but as you can tell from these covers which I wanted to share with you, this is a book about tripping. He took mescaline and he wrote about it. Is anyone here taking mescaline? Don't think I am. I'm not taking mescaline, but I feel like I have, having read this one. And one of the amazing things about the book is the way he takes the experience so seriously. You know, there's this brilliant bit where he's looking at his trousers and he's just like, he's looking at the way they fold and the fabric and he's just like, whoa, trousers. But he just goes with it and he just takes on that reality as if it's just as significant as the reality we inhabit on a more familiar day-to-day basis. And being a philosopher, he structures his thoughts. And this is how he does it. So, as far as Huxley's concerned, we have layers of awareness. This is really underpins our whole lived experience. So you've got personal consciousness. That's what we've all got in this room right now. We're thinking, we're feeling, we're aware of it. And we take it all on a individual level. We've got the personal subconscious. It's probably quite appropriate we're having this talk at 8 a.m. because that's the space of dreams. If you're still feeling a little dreamy and dopey, that's you're still a little bit perhaps in touch with the personal subconscious. But there's the operation of the mind and the sense of self that we're not driving in a conscious way. He picks up on the idea of the collective unconscious, which had become popular at that time through Carl Jung, but that's the idea of archetypes. You know, across cultures, we all have ideas of things like the tree of life, or you know, the old wizard. You know, these powerful communal ideas that really deeply inform our understanding of how life works. And Huxley was acknowledging that, but he also recognised that there was this deeper layer, that sense of visionary experience, which sort of sits around everything that we know and experience, but we're not in touch with it day to day. And really importantly, in the context of this talk, there aren't words for what we encounter in the space of visionary experience. It really, you know, visionary is the operative word here. This is a layer of experience that we're getting glimpses and moments, or maybe when we've taken mescaline, but it also refers to it in the context of, you know, what it was like to go into the grandeur of a medieval cathedral when most of what you know is, you know, striving away on the farm. You know, transporting experiences take us to somewhere well outside our day-to-day experience, a different layer. And we've always craved these. As humans, this isn't something that just exists and you can forget about it. Like, we have a very deep drive to access these experiences when we can. And Huxley's not the only person to talk about it. Here's the incredible Virginia Woolf with this fantastic quote: "Behind the cotton wool is hidden a pattern. The whole world is a work of art. There is no Shakespeare, no Beethoven, no God. We are the words, we are the music, we are the thing itself." Now, she's not describing exactly the same thing as Huxley, but it's just striking to me that these two great modern writers are simultaneously reaching for this layer of experience that is not the day-to-day. It's not how we regularly think. And they're clearly celebrating it. You know, as far as they're concerned, this is at least as important, at least as real, maybe even more true than what we experience day to day. And again, that's driving their profound creative work. I've set the live illustrator a challenge with this talk, haven't I? I look forward to seeing how these are manifested. But I guess what's kind of funny is that both Huxley and Woolf are having to use words to try and fathom these depths, you know. And so even when there are no words for what we're talking about, they can at least point us in the direction of the things we might want to talk about or invite people to consider. So, in that sense, you know, yes, words are limited. You know, Huxley says really explicitly that you can't describe this stuff. Language limits our thinking into the day-to-day. But at the same time, you can't go to these places, you know, or at least words can help us share something of what the experience of these spaces is like. Just going to make sure I'm not missing a bit. I guess just a further thought on that is just, it can be easy to look those aspects, but I certainly do think in these terms, as an artistic creator and as a day-to-day professional operator, just that sense that there are stories on the surface and stories beneath the surface, and bringing them together represents the most complete version of reality, and thinking with that kind of rigorous approach, I find, brings out work that feels stronger. So hopefully that makes some of the case for this interstitial layer. I don't know how it resonates with all of you, but what I think is very clear from the Gilgamesh example of the modern writers is just the power of words to help us get under the surface of meaning and say something really that connects us across various different layers. Okay, having taken that sort of theoretical learning, I'll show how that applies in some of my professional practice. So just one example of my artistic work. This is a film I made, shown last year. This was a collaboration with the Scottish dance company Dude & Dance, and it was inspired by the Minotaur myth, so you'll see that idea of old stories goes deep in me, but very practically in the sense of layers of creativity. What this film included was filmed content and a voiceover that didn't match it, but operated in similar thematic territory. To give you a couple of quotes: a creature half bull and half human, the monument of their polluted love. Now, Paul, the dancer, is not half bull and half human. He used to be a ballet dancer, then he became a bodybuilder, so he does have an incredible physique, but he's a human in this film. We don't try and pretend he's anything but. But that sense that one thing relates to the other allows the imagination to make that leap between layers that almost, becomes a kind of dialogue between the content and the audience, and that adds an extra layer, which can be very useful as well. And another line: it is tempting to wonder whether the Minotaur was not in fact there already, there in the ether of the possible, waiting for the collective imagination to find it, perpetuate it, and to give it life. So if nothing else, you'll see that what I've spoken about in this talk is consistent with the fascinations that drive my purely creative practice as well. The idea that ideas exist in a kind of life of their own, and that when we can, find access to them and animate them, and that they affect the reality around them. Okay, I'll now share a little bit about my professional work and Read Words. So Read Words is a commercial writing agency. We make brands and businesses stronger through language. And I'll just share a couple of examples that made me think of layers in terms of work we've done in the last couple of years. So, as a writing agency, one of the things we do quite a bit of is naming. Names are a layer expressed through language, and often the most visible. So Sony Pictures were developing a new studio in Hollywood, an experimental space that would allow directors to try out new lighting, new camera angles, a black box space that would be cost-effective experimental space for their work. And they needed a name for it. And so what we gave them was this thing. And it works in terms of, you can think of layers of metaphor there, right? Like the torchlight is clearly an implication of exploring unknown, dark territories, discovery. But there's another way in which this has a layered aspect to it as well, because the name recalled the history of the company, the history of the brand, and the imagery and iconography that goes with it. So coming back to the sort of main themes of the talk, layers move in more than one direction at once. One of those is sort of strata of meaning, but the other is layer of history. And when you can combine layers in different ways, that's where you get something that resonates perhaps that little bit more deeply. And the last example is the Premier League. So the Premier League had an issue with their self-perception and the way they talked about themselves. Those of you who follow football would know they've had quite a lot of criticism over the years for being all about the money. And they'd sort of taken that criticism into themselves. And in doing so, they'd become very dry and corporate in the way they spoke, a little defensive. They didn't inhabit their strengths as an organisation. So they brought us in to find a voice that would both celebrate the power of the biggest sports league in the world, and also take ownership of the work they were doing to support the lower level activity as well. So this is what we wrote for them, and I'll finish on this. We are the Premier League, home of the football that thrills, unites and obsesses. So we know, football matters. Our kind of football, elite, intense, electrifying, and every other kind. Lower league, non-league, local parks and school playgrounds. It's all special, it's all powerful. We're here for all of it. To support it, protect it, and celebrate it. And so what you have here is obviously the layers of activity. Premier League exists as top-level league, and the support it gives are different layers, but you also get the layers of activity, support, protection, celebration. So again, thinking about different perspectives through the medium of layers can really add to the power of a message and strengthen your communication. Thanks so much for your time and attention. It's been absolutely pleasure speaking to you. Any questions?